Hi, I'm Brad Bright, and this is the God is the Issue podcast. We seek to make God the issue in every issue. Now, this is our second season. In our first season, we focused pretty much just on making God the issue and the cultural issues. But this season, what we're going to do is we're going to add in the personal component. We make the God the issue in every issue, both the cultural issues and the personal issues. And why we do this is because, unlike the federal government, you can't give away what you don't own. And therefore, if you're not making God the issue in your own life, you're not going to be very good about giving away God to the culture, to a culture that desperately is seeking meaning and God even when they don't realize it. So with that, let's get started today. Today's episode is going to be a little more personal. I haven't always been comfortable sharing personal things. I grew up in a very high profile family where I was in a fishbowl, and so I learned to guard my privacy with jealousy. I can even remember thinking, okay, if I'm interested in this gal over here, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show up at public events with this other gal so that all the gossips would gossip about this other gal and what's going on with Brad and this other gal, while the gal I was really interested in was over here, and I would allow me to really develop the relationship without having a spotlight on it. It's kind of like my mom always told me growing up, Brad, always tell the truth, but you don't have to tell everything you know. And I learned to do that well. I would communicate with a smile on my face, but I learned to deflect very expertly, and I learned to do it in very nuanced ways so the average person I was talking to would never pick up on it. But today, I'm going to get very personal about what's going on in my life, and here is why. It's because God said, Brad, you need to talk about this so other people can benefit from the story that I'm taking you through. So in light of that, let's just jump into it. 2 years ago, I sat down with a doctor, and in kind of a surreal moment, the doctor said, Brad, you have cancer. We need to operate. Don't wait. It was like it was happening to someone else. It was like I was watching this happen to someone else. And yet, as it began to sink in, I thought, oh, this is cancer. This could kill me. But the doctor said, don't wait. So we didn't wait. So I went in, had surgery, and they got all of it. And that's kind of like, oh, okay, I can breathe again. But then last fall, everything changed. I sat down in a follow-up appointment with a doctor, and not only did he say that the cancer had returned, but he said, Brad, you have stage 4 metastatic cancer. We can't cure you. All we can do is slow the cancer down. And it's like, oh, I didn't see that coming. What do you do in a moment like that? What goes through your heart and mind? Well, let me tell you what went through my heart and mind. And then to do that, I have to take you back 6 months prior to that conversation. And this was last spring. And last spring, I began having a conversation with God. And it went over a period of a few weeks. But here's what God said to me. He said, Brad, you strongly and deeply believe in my sovereignty, and that's good. But he said, I have one problem with you. You're often more like an Eeyore than a Tigger about my sovereignty. He said, sometimes you're fatalistic about my sovereignty. You resign yourself to my sovereignty. But unlike my servant Job, you don't embrace my sovereignty even in your pain. And I went, oh. And I began thinking about the story of Job. And here was Job, as you go and read the story. He had lost all his wealth. It had been taken away from him. He had lost his health. And he was sitting there in ashes with boils all over his skin and scraping the boils off his skin with shards of pottery. And then he had lost all of his children. The house collapsed on them in the middle of a storm. And here was a man who had nothing. And his wife goes to him, Job, just curse God and die. But what did Job do? Job responded, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I realized you can make that statement two ways. You can say it the way Job said it, or you could say it the way I sometimes said it, in my heart. The Lord taketh away. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Oh, well. That's fatalism, folks. That's resigning yourself to the will of God. That is not embracing it. And God finished that conversation with me with these words. They weren't audible words, but they were clear. He said, Brad, I want to teach you to embrace my sovereignty. Because when I allow these things, different things in your life, it's because I love you. They're for your ultimate good. And I said, okay, Lord. And although I continued to think about it, I did not anticipate what was just around the corner. Silly me. When God teaches you something like this, he's going to give you an opportunity to practice it. And so last fall, the doctor calls us in and gives us the message that I have cancer and it's going to kill me. But you know what happened? Inside, I realized I don't have to respond like a fatalist to the will of God. I can respond like the Apostle Paul, who said, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. And that's the decision I made, is to, with the Apostle Paul, realize whether I live or whether I die, it is God's will for me. Nothing can touch me apart from the will of God. The reason I was able to make that choice with the Apostle Paul to say to live is Christ and to die is gain is because over the years, God had taught me about his faithfulness. And to the core of my being, I believe God is faithful. And I remember where that really started for me, where that process started for me. I was a freshman in college. And I was in college up in Chicago, and I remember at Christmas time, I was headed to the airport to fly home. I walked into Chicago O'Hare, and the airport was packed with people wall to wall. It's as packed as I've ever seen an airport in my life. And I thought, ooh, this isn't good. But I went ahead and got in line to get my ticket to get on the plane. And as I was standing there, I realized I'm not going to make my flight. And just out of panic, I said, Lord, I need 10 more minutes. And I looked up at the board, and it went click, and the flight was delayed 10 minutes. And I went, ooh, cool. And I stood there a little longer, and I finally realized again, I'm still not going to make my flight. And so again, out of panic, this is not a prayer of faith. I believe God could do it. But it was really a prayer of panic. And I said, Lord, I'm still not going to make my flight. I need 10 more minutes. I looked up the board and went click. It was delayed another 10 minutes. And I went, oh, he really is listening. And he really does care about the details of my life. And over the years, God continued to teach me his faithfulness. He didn't say yes to every prayer I prayed. I assure you he didn't. He wisely said no many, many times. But what he taught me is he's faithful. He's always listening. He always wants opportunity to engage in my life, to express his faithfulness to me. But like a good father, he knows when to say yes, he knows when to say no, and he knows when to say wait. But because of that, my belief in God's faithfulness ran deep. And so I was able to respond with those words. You see, God is my coach. And this is what it looks like. A coach makes you do what you don't want to do in order that you can become what you want to become. And you say, okay, Brad, so what is it that you want to become? And what I want to become is I want to become conformed to the image of Christ. I want to be more like Jesus. And in order to do that, it requires going through some stuff that's not fun. Just like Jesus went through a lot of stuff that wasn't any fun, we have to go through those things as well. So I think of Romans 8:28 that says, all things work together for the good for those who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. Now, when you read all of Romans 8, you see before that, it's very clear we're going to have to suffer. And after that verse, it's very clear we're going to have to suffer. So that verse is set in the context of what? Suffering. All things work, all suffering, all things, good things, bad things work together for the good for those who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. And so suffering is part of our experience in life, part of our experience of learning to walk with God. And folks, that's where I am right now. So when I got the cancer diagnosis and the doctor said, Brad, we can't cure you, I realized, folks, this was a gift from the hand of God himself. He was answering my innermost cry to be conformed to the image of his Son. You know, my wife and I, whenever a curveball comes into our lives, we often ask ourselves the following question and ask each other. Is this a problem or is this an opportunity to see God work? Because here's what I've learned over the years. If my eyes are focused on God and I understand he truly loves me and he's truly faithful, then I don't have problems. I only have opportunities to see him work. Let me tell you a story. And this occurred shortly after I graduated from college. I was sitting in my dad's office, and a reporter from a Christian magazine was interviewing him. And at one point, there's a lot of boilerplate questions, but at one point the reporter said, Dr. Bright, share with me a problem you face that the average Christian can relate to. And my dad said, I don't have any problems. Well, the reporter said, Dr. Bright, he was trying to be respectful, but he was a little frustrated. He said, Dr. Bright, let's not over-spiritualize this. We all have problems. Well, the reporter asked the question 7 different ways, trying to get my dad to admit that he had problems. All the time I'm sitting there watching. And finally, my dad turned to him and looked him square in the eye. And he said, you need to understand something. I'm a slave of Jesus. It's not the slave's responsibility to be successful. The only responsibility of the slave is to do what the master asks him to do. And he said, when you understand that, you understand you don't have problems. You only have opportunities to see the master work. And I went, oh, because I realized at that moment that statement did not come from my dad's head. It came from his gut. It was gut check time, and I realized he actually, to the core of his being, believed what he just said. And all of a sudden I understood this guy I'd called Dad all these years, how he could go through incredibly stressful situations and always be calm. And it wasn't just an outward calm, folks. It was an inward calm. My dad could sit down in a chair at any point in time and be asleep in 2 minutes, just consistently, because he was always at rest, even in the midst of the storms of life. Why? Because he didn't have problems. He only had opportunities to see the master work. Once you learn that, you come to experience the joy and the peace that Jesus promised. But you only learn that by 1, developing a deeper understanding of who God is, and 2, by keeping your eyes focused on the master at all times. See, our God is sovereign. He is the sovereign God. He is the King of the universe, and nothing happens that he's not aware of and that he doesn't allow in our lives. And as we come to understand that more deeply, we're changed from the inside out. Let me frame it for you this way. In any situation, either your circumstances will determine how you see God, or your view of God will determine how you see your circumstances. And in fact, it's more than that. In any situation, your circumstances will determine how you experience God, or your view of God will determine how you experience your circumstances. I remember the last couple of years of my dad's life, my dad died of pulmonary fibrosis. And it's where you slowly suffocate to death. And so I'd often go back and ask, Dad, how are you doing? And he'd say, I'm rejoicing in the Lord. And I said, Dad, I know you're rejoicing in the Lord, but how are you doing? You know, in those last 2 years, he only answered that question directly twice. He'd say, those 2 times that I'm not feeling very well, but I'm rejoicing in the Lord. Folks, I did not understand what he was saying to me. Not until about 3 years after he had passed away. And during those intervening 3 years, a number of other widows whose husbands had died of pulmonary fibrosis came to my mom and just to commiserate with her. Because what every one of them said is, this is a horrible disease. It changed my husband. My husband became mean and surly. He wasn't the man I married. And after hearing this a few times, I went, oh, my dad was the same man he'd always been, kind and considerate, till the day he died. And it suddenly dawned on me why. He was rejoicing in the Lord. Folks, his eyes were not on himself. His eyes were on the God who loved him. His focus was there. How many times did I walk in his bedroom those last couple years and see him? He had fallen asleep. His head had fallen down. His glasses had slid down his nose, with his Bible open on his lap. You see, he was focused on the Creator God. And when your focus is on God, it changes even how you experience your circumstances. Let me bring this to a close by asking you a question. Do you have problems? Or do you have opportunities to see God work? You see, in any situation, it's going to be one or the other. And it all boils down to 2 things: your view of God and where your focus is at that moment. If it's on your circumstances or on yourself, of course you have problems. But if it's focused on the God who cares deeply about you, all you have left are opportunities to see God work. If you would like to develop a deeper, more personal view of God, I encourage you to go and study the attributes of God, asking the so what questions. So why does this matter in my life today? Before my dad died, in the last few years of his life, he wrote a book called God, Who Are You Anyway? And it's on the attributes of God, but it's not just talking about attributes of God. It's talking about why they matter in my life and your life today. I would really encourage you to go pick up a copy if you've never really looked carefully at the attributes. That is the character of God. Pick up a copy and go through it. And I would actually encourage you to read through it with some friends. I don't care if they're Christians or non-Christians, but read through it with some friends and ask the real questions. Be real about it. Don't sugarcoat anything. Why did this God allow this in my life? Why does God do things this way? Ask those questions together with each one of his attributes, whether you're talking about his love or his justice or his sovereignty or his power. Folks, by asking those questions, you're now asking the real questions of life, the deepest questions of life. And it's only by asking the questions of who is God and why does it matter that we're able to move from saying I have problems to saying I have opportunities to see God work and to really mean it. Folks, thanks for taking a few minutes just to talk here, to listen and to kind of ask the questions, why does this matter in my life? This is a very personal process for me, and I hope for those of you who are Christians, you'll pray for me. Over the next few years, I'm hoping we'll beat this thing. The doctors say it's over. And God has not told me whether he's going to cure me or not. But here's what I know. Whether he cures me or not, he is the sovereign God. And he means this for good in my life. Thanks for joining me. I hope this has been meaningful to you as well. But always remember, We seek to make God the issue in every issue, whether it's in the culture or it's in our own lives.